It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. It's Feedback Friday. And this Feedback Friday, you will notice I am a little harried and my clothes are clashing and all that stuff. I have a very short window to record this today because it's been busy, but I did, based on the topics that we talked about this week, especially on Monday, it was okay. I mean, God, you expect junked up comments when you tackle that topic of the manosphere is just gender flipped, radical feminism. You expect there to be some noise. The good part was the good conversations that I had about it. And there were quite a lot of them. And I want to focus on those. Also, thank you to the people who have supported the various two women talking. It's been three women talking lately, but three women talking co-panelists of late. It really helps a lot when, you just kick a bit to their coffees or, well, we're doing coffee now. But it does help. Yeah, that's an interesting initiative as well. But I really want to focus on Mondays, and let me do the help support this channel. So help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. And I want to focus on the idea of sort of, what do we do about all this stuff? And I actually asked a couple guys about, or they volunteered the information based on certain things that I'd shared. And it all sort of came down to, sorry, my headphones were dying and I need them soon. It all kind of came down to the challenge of, yes, we know sort of there are pockets of the manosphere that are better and worse, but overall it's not really serving men. One, because it was demonized. Two, because there's a lot of grift. So what's an alternative? And it really comes down to how do we support men expressing their emotions, recognizing it's not going to be similar to the way women express emotions? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And there's really no easy answer to that. I always believe in small groups and sort of one-on-one as the starting point. Why? Because I've seen that work. The minute you start trying to do it on this huge scale, you start having individual mileage may vary problems. You start getting the, sort of gaslighting and invalidating of the minority experience. You start getting... I had an in-depth conversation with one fella who saw a video about a woman going, men need to emotionally catch up on their emotional skills. And he asked me what I thought of it. And I somewhat disagreed, because the problem is we train male and female emotiveness differently, right? And so it's not this idea that women are experts on emotion and emotional communication is wrong, and it is bad for women because it sets this ridiculously high standard and perpetuates the idea of women as refuge, this idea that women are just supposed to soothe and nurture and comfort. And people soothe and nurture and comfort in different ways at different times. And if someone is just constantly soothing and constantly nurturing, they get drained, right? And we know men, as a rule, not everybody, tend to be trained to be self-oriented. Now, that does not mean men are selfish. Quite the opposite. But self-oriented. I am on my own. I must meet my needs. I must do this alone, right? Whereas women are other-oriented. And that's why we funneled all this stuff into women in leadership, and the results are not where we thought they would be based on the investment, right? So there are deficits in women's socialization in terms of things like assertiveness, in terms of things like rational risk taking, in terms of things like a more traditional form of bravery, right? Whereas with men, it is definitely that vulnerability, that the catch up, and maybe catch up is the wrong word, right? Maybe it's just meeting in the middle more, allowing more vulnerability on the men's side and more assertiveness and aggressiveness on the women's side. And we had a really interesting discussion on the Discord, because I am somebody who does, I approach people for friendship as well. I don't wait to be approached on anything, in part because I didn't get approached. It happened, but it didn't happen that often. It wasn't that anything really fell in my lap. I took some risks, some of them kind of crazy, some of them paid off, some of them, well, you have seen my life. And I know that's more masculine behavior. And so I am aware of not just the social punishments for it, but also the humiliation that you get subjected to when, based on the people getting asked, not necessarily behaving graciously. And so, like, the guys in the conversation were absolutely aghast at the fact that, even guys that took me up on it mocked me for being, not subtle about expressing interest. And they're like, I would love it if a woman were more like that, were more aggressive. It's like, yeah, people think they would. What it actually feels like is different, because we know that when you don't control when and how the approach happens, and this is the problem with the manosphere women control dating thing, right? Because when you think about it, if men do the approaching, men control the time, the place, the technique. So there's no way to prepare for it when you're the recipient. And people don't handle it well. The same way, when someone says something and you kind of go, and then later on it's like, oh, this would have been a great line, and I said this, like that evening. It's the same thing. And so people, the whole women are pickier thing just gets completely inverted. And there's science on this, and my own anecdotal experience backs us up, that when it's reversed, men, as a rule, don't really behave any better. So it's not about men, it's not about women, it's about this dance we do socially. There are things we can do about that, but we have to stop fixating on modern dating as the crisis of our time, because it's not the cause. It's a symptom. And as somebody who did get that experience of a guy going, hey, hey, you want to dance? You? And I walk away and he's laughing with his buddies about it. Like, I get it, No. And, one would argue that maybe I'd have better luck if I was more traditionally feminine. I am not good at that. part of the reason I was a pretty good pinup model is because it was all practiced. I was aware. I know exactly what that movement's doing. It's why I can teach it to other people, is it doesn't come naturally. I mean, I'm sitting right here with like my knees are up here, right? Hardly ladylike shit. And I think that we talk about a double empathy gap when it comes to like neurotypical and neurodivergent people. We have a double empathy gap when it comes to gender. I mean, gender, the reason we are obsessed with it is because it's the one identifier that we still segregate as a rule. We don't have bathrooms separated by race anymore. We used to, right? We don't have things separated by religion anymore the same way. Catholics can be in the US government, right? Catholics can be in the British government. But we still segregate by gender. And that makes it unique as a social construct. Now you might say, but there's reasons, but okay. They said the exact same bloody thing about race and religion, right? And I do think there are reasons. I think there's a modesty thing, a shyness thing, a privacy thing that I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think that maybe men's bathrooms should have more privacy. Like, let's do away with urinals just open on the wall. Let's have more privacy for men in men's bathrooms. A little more bodily integrity. But I don't make the rules. I don't think that perpetuating this myth that it was ever about safety is helpful. And people fight me on this, and I'm not interested in fighting. If you look up the history, it was not about safety. Public bathroom designs are designed to cut down on gay sex and drug use. Not about safety. But this idea still that women are default victims and men are default predators, that both the extremes perpetuate, is a problem. Because that's a terrible mindset to instill in women. And that's part of the reason that women don't approach men, is that if, you approach a guy and it progresses and it turns out that he abuses you, well, you were a slut, you should have known better. And, we had a whole conversation in the Discord about people assuming that redheads are slutty, like gingers are slutty and angry and in League of Satan and Supernatural and all that shit. And the guys are like, really? Really? I was like, oh, yeah, it's a huge assumption, which is not fun to be on the receiving end of, because you have to either constantly be fighting that stereotype or recognize that no matter what I do, people are going to think I'm just some slut at a lower threshold and take that hit. And, it's this idea, there's this idea in the manosphere about women are protected and therefore preferred by society. But that's really not where cloister women away from public participation came from. Women were property when that stuff started. And it was all about, well, if she's sullied, then that poor family is never going to marry her off. It was protecting their shipment. It was protecting goods. It was not about protecting somebody as a person. And does this mean, and I heard a lot this week, well, the manosphere does have some points. It's like, okay, a broken clock is right twice a day. The problem is the focus is wrong and they're poorly argued. And instead of making a positive dent in men's issues, it has made people less likely to explore them and to really take them seriously, because the focus is on all the wrong things, right? And that doesn't mean that, access to you know, the justice system or things like that. I do think taking the physical safety of men more seriously is important, but the arguments that the manosphere makes are wrong. And no matter what we try to develop, it is going to get lumped in public opinion with the manosphere. I mean, fuck, YouTube recommendations recommend manosphere content when people watch my videos. If I don't do manosphere content, right? And so it really is just small stuff. I mean, we have a dedicated men's shelter in Toronto now. I mentioned this before, and the police are aware of it. And so now men have somewhere to go with their families when, it's the greater Toronto area, so it serves a very large area. But now there's a place for men who are with abusive women that can go with their families and not be in the situation I was in reverse, where my mother left me and my sister with the abusive parent. That was the worst. I don't remember exactly how long because it's all a blur, but 6 months of the year to my life when I was the oldest woman in the house with my absolutely psycho father. And it's no different when the mother's abusive. When you leave the kid with the abusive parent, the abuse gets worse. And so I'm glad these things exist, but I think that there does need to be more mediated, moderated discussion so that somebody just can't go zero sum on the other person. There has to be some agreement that, like, look, if somebody calls time, regroup. And there has to be an understanding at the beginning of the conversation that if we are to engage here, nobody is trying to trap you. Nobody is trying to attack you. Nobody is trying to cancel you. And nobody hates you. And if you are moderated, it's not a clique. You agreed to these rules when you started the discussion. Now, does this mean a moderator can't be wrong? No, of course they can't. But that's, to me, the difference between moderation and facilitation in my mind. Moderators keep things on topic, whereas facilitators are watching people and make sure no one's like uncomfortable to the point of shutdown. And this is possible. It's just a question of everybody showing up sincerely and authentically so that when it comes time to, like, okay, you have that emotional reaction, something trips an emotional breaker, you don't go into that, you're all against me, this is just like in high school, because there's a part of us all who care about these issues who is still back there. There's a part of us in some cases that is still 8 years old. There's a part of us that's still 6 years old, right? Some people, they have pre-verbal trauma. And it's really, really important to be aware that we have that part. So that part doesn't take the reins when we're dealing with this difficult stuff. That is sort of my next area of interest, I think, but I am out of time for this. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.